I grew up in a narrow two-family house in Queens with my grandmother, Nora. It stood on a quiet block in Masbeth, squeezed between a brick duplex and a corner deli, and it never looked haunted. It wasn't even old. My grandparents had bought the lot in the late 90s and watched the place go up from bare concrete, so there was no dramatic story about a murder, a fire, or some previous owner refusing to leave. Still, that house never felt empty. Almost everyone in my family has a story about it. My cousin heard someone whisper his name from the laundry room when he was alone. My aunt once found every kitchen cabinet open at 3 in the morning. When I was 8, I woke up to slow footsteps crossing the hallway outside my bedroom, stopping at my door, then continuing toward the bathroom. A few seconds later, the faucet turned on. I remember hiding under my blanket until sunrise because my grandmother was asleep downstairs and there was nobody else in the house. Another time, I snuck down for cereal after midnight and saw a little boy sitting on the radiator beside the front stairs. He wore a dark school uniform and had his hands folded in his lap. I only saw him for a second before the light from a passing car moved across the wall. Then the radiator was empty. Things like that happened every few months, just far enough apart that I could convince myself I had imagined them. The rumble of the freight trains, old pipes, headlights through the blinds, New York gives you plenty of excuses for strange noises and moving shadows. Then my grandmother got sick. She had ovarian cancer, and after almost 2 years of treatment, it spread to her liver and lungs. When the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do, we brought her home for hospice. We moved the sofa and dining table out of the front room and set up a hospital bed near the windows, where she could see the sycamore trees and hear kids walking home from school. That final week, the house changed. I would sit beside her bed and catch people moving through the hallway in my peripheral vision. At first I thought relatives were coming in without me hearing the front door, but whenever I looked, the hall was empty. My sister Marissa saw them too. So did our mother. None of us talked about it until one afternoon when all three of us turned toward the hallway at the exact same time because a woman in a red coat had walked past the doorway. There was no woman in the house. My grandmother also started looking at places where nobody was standing. She would smile at the ceiling or follow something with her eyes from one side of the room to the other. Once she lifted her hand as if someone had leaned down to kiss it. "Your grandfather still wears that awful aftershave," she whispered. He had been dead for 11 years. The power acted strangely too. One evening, the floor lamp beside her bed clicked off while the rest of the house stayed lit. My uncle reached for the switch, but Grandma shook her head. "Leave it," she said. "He'll turn it back on." The lamp came on before she finished the sentence. By then she was getting weaker and confused. She kept trying to climb out of bed, so we bought a security camera from a pharmacy in Jackson Heights. 2 nights before she died, Marissa and I were in Grandma's bedroom folding clothes. The monitor sat on the dresser between us. I happened to look over and saw something crouched beside the hospital bed. At first I thought it was a glitch caused by the night vision mode. The image was grainy and green, but the shape was too solid. It was small, maybe the size of a child, with long arms and a hunched back. Its head looked almost hairless, and its face was turned toward my grandmother. Marissa followed my stare and grabbed my wrist so hard her nails cut my skin. On the screen, the thing raised itself onto the mattress with a movement that was somewhere between crawling and jumping. It leaned over Grandma's chest. She was asleep, but her hands suddenly came up. She swatted at the air like she was brushing away a fly. The figure dropped off the bed and vanished below the camera's frame. Marissa ran downstairs while I stayed frozen in front of the monitor. She checked under the bed, behind the curtains, even inside the coat closet. Nothing was there. Grandma had not woken up. I wish I could say it was just compression noise or a shadow. I have tried to explain it that way for years. But what terrified me wasn't only how it looked. Even through the screen, I felt this pressure in the room, like something cruel had noticed us watching. The following night, neither of us wanted to look at the camera, but Marissa suddenly said, "Tell me you see that." Behind Grandma's pillow was the outline of a second head. This one wasn't deformed. It looked pale and thin, almost like Grandma herself, except it was facing down at her body. Above it, near the top of the screen, another face had appeared in the darkness. The face above her was my Uncle Daniel. He had died from pancreatic cancer 4 years earlier. The image was blurry, but there was no mistaking his heavy eyebrows, the small scar beside his mouth, or the way one side of his face always seemed slightly higher when he smiled. Marissa took a picture of the monitor with her phone before the screen flickered. For some reason, seeing him made the fear loosen its grip on me. After the thing from the previous night, his face felt like a message: she's not alone. I've got her. I still don't know what the pale head behind Grandma was. Marissa believes it was some part of her already separating from her body. I don't know what I believe. Grandma died 2 mornings later, just before the first buses started running down Grand Avenue. We stayed in the house for another month, sorting her belongings and meeting with a realtor. The ordinary activity returned, the occasional footsteps, a door opening by itself, a shadow crossing the upstairs landing, but the violent feeling was gone. Whatever had gathered around her during those final days seemed to leave when she did. I still have the photograph from the monitor. I have never posted it because Grandma's face is visible, and because every time I open it, I feel the same cold pressure behind my eyes. Maybe someday I'll blur her out and share it. For now, it stays in a hidden folder on my phone. This happened in the fall of 2020, when I was 14. I was home alone in our apartment in Washington Heights on a Thursday afternoon and bored out of my mind. I called my best friend, Mateo, who lived 2 buildings away, and asked if he wanted to walk along the Hudson River Greenway. He was still coming back from school, so I decided to go by myself. I changed into a t-shirt and running shorts. The shorts had no pockets, which matters later, so I tucked my phone into the waistband and ran my earbud cable under my shirt. The path near the river was busier than I expected, though not crowded. There were maybe a dozen runners and cyclists spread out between the basketball courts and the stretch near the George Washington Bridge. I jogged for a while, walked when my legs started burning, then lay in the grass and joined a group video call with Mateo and another friend. That's when I noticed 2 men on a black electric scooter. They passed me once going south, then again heading north. The passenger kept turning his head toward me. I didn't think much of it at first. People circle that path all the time, and I was more focused on complaining to my friends about school. Around 6, the sky started getting dark and I headed home. Instead of staying on the busy avenue, I took a shortcut beneath the elevated section near Riverside Drive. I had used it dozens of times. It ran past a fenced construction site, a parking garage, and a row of buildings that were mostly empty after business hours. Halfway through, I got the feeling that someone was behind me. I turned and saw the same scooter approaching slowly. I whispered to my friends, who were still on the call, that something felt wrong and told them to mute themselves. The scooter stopped beside me. The driver asked where the nearest subway entrance was. I pointed toward 181st Street, even though it was not the closest station. While I answered, I looked into the scooter's side mirror and saw the passenger staring directly at my waist. He had noticed the shape of my phone under my shirt. Everything inside me went cold. The driver thanked me, but they didn't leave normally. They rolled forward at walking speed, talking quietly and glancing back. I had the distinct feeling they were deciding whether to turn around. There was a mechanic across the street working under the hood of a taxi. I considered going to him, but the road between us was wide and nearly empty. I also thought about stopping a passing car, but what if the doors were locked? What if the driver panicked and sped away? So I chose the third option. I turned around and ran. I sprinted against traffic until I reached the entrance to a narrow service road, then cut through a gap in the construction fence. I could hear my friends asking what was happening, but I couldn't answer. My legs felt numb, and every breath scraped my throat. After maybe 2 minutes, I looked back. The scooter was inside the construction area. The passenger had gotten off and was running after me while the driver followed over the uneven dirt. One of them shouted, "Stop. We just need directions." That made me run harder. I crossed a muddy lot, climbed over a low concrete divider, and entered a maze of alleys behind several apartment buildings. I knew that area better than they did. I cut between dumpsters, jumped a chain, and came out near Mateo's block. I told him to get downstairs immediately. By the time I reached his building, my hands were numb. I collapsed beside a parked van just as Mateo came running outside in his slippers. He looked terrified before I even explained anything. I was shaking so hard I couldn't stand, and when I tried to speak, I threw up by the curb. Mateo dragged me into the lobby while his mother called my parents. I don't remember much after that. I woke the next morning with cuts along my shins and dark bruises on both knees from climbing through the construction site. My phone was still in my waistband. It had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it changed how I moved through the city for years. I avoided that shortcut until I was almost 18. Even now, when a scooter slows beside me, I check every reflection I can find. A few years later, my family moved to a townhouse in Bay Ridge. I had been adopted at 12, and my 2 older brothers were preparing to leave for college. The house was larger than anywhere we'd lived before, 3 floors, a small yard, and a finished basement with a bathroom. At first, the basement was our game room. There was a boiler room behind one door and storage behind another. When my brothers moved out, my sister Leah claimed the basement bedroom. For 2 years, she complained about nightmares and noises. She said the boiler room door opened by itself. She saw a tall shadow standing near the bathroom. Sometimes she woke to someone whispering from the stairs. We made fun of her. My parents blamed energy drinks and her sleep schedule. I said old houses settled and pipes caused noises. I wish I had taken her seriously. Leah moved to Buffalo after graduating early, and my parents renovated the basement for me. I was thrilled. It felt like a free studio apartment. On my first night downstairs, I stayed awake past midnight unpacking boxes. Around 1, I heard the door at the top of the basement stairs open. Thinking it was my mother, I called, "Aren't you usually asleep by now?" Nobody answered. I stepped into the hallway and looked up. The door was wide open, and the kitchen beyond it was dark. I checked upstairs and found everyone asleep. I closed the door and returned to my room. The next morning, Mom insisted she had never gone downstairs. Days later, I came home and found every basement door open. The door from the kitchen was open. My bedroom door was open. The storage room and boiler room were both open too. Our cats weren't allowed downstairs, and I worried one had slipped in. I found our gray cat, Pepper, crouched in the far corner of the boiler room. Her back was arched and she was hissing at the wall. When I stepped toward her, the door slammed. The warped door was hard to close by hand. You had to lift and pull it. No draft could move it. Pepper screamed and launched herself into my arms. I grabbed the handle, forced the door open, and ran upstairs. Mom came in while I stood in the kitchen holding the cat. She asked why Pepper was downstairs, and I asked whether she had left the doors open. I haven't been home since 8, she said. We checked every window and entrance. Nothing was forced. My brothers denied stopping by, and our security camera showed nobody entering the house after we left that morning. That night, every sound made me stare at my door. Around 3, the boiler room handle turned slowly, clicked, and stopped. The next morning, I called Leah. She went silent when I described the doors. I told you, she finally said. It doesn't like people sleeping down there. After that, the activity was impossible to ignore. The boiler room door opened several times a week. The storage room light turned on by itself. My bedroom door sometimes drifted open even after I locked it. While brushing my teeth, I saw a tall black shape in the mirror behind me. It stood in the bathroom doorway, almost touching the ceiling. When I spun around, nothing was there. A week later, I had sleep paralysis for the only time in my life. I woke facing the bathroom. The door was open, and the same shape stood inside. It had no face, but I knew it was watching me. I tried to scream and couldn't. It remained there until the furnace kicked on, then seemed to fold backward into the darkness. My friend Ava's mother claimed to be sensitive to spirits. I never believed in mediums, but I was desperate. She came over one evening in April. We didn't tell her which room scared us most. The moment she reached the bottom of the stairs, she turned toward the boiler room. "Whatever is here stays behind that door," she said. She refused to enter. She told us the energy felt angry, confused, and much older than the house. She said it wasn't a dead person in the normal sense. It was something that had attached itself to an object and was using the basement as a place to settle. My mother asked which object. Ava's mother looked toward a shelf of boxes Leah had left behind. Inside one box were 3 antique carnival masks she had bought at a flea market in Coney Island. One was painted white, one red, and the third had a cracked smile that seemed to change under the light. We carried the box upstairs and placed it in the garage. The next morning, the white mask was lying face up at the bottom of the basement stairs. Nobody admitted moving it. My father threw all 3 masks into a dumpster several blocks away. For a few days, the house was quiet. Then the boiler room door opened again, but only a few inches. We had the house blessed twice. The activity never vanished, but it weakened. The storage light still turns on, and Pepper refuses to enter the basement. I moved back upstairs after 3 months. Leah swears the masks were never the cause. She believes something in the basement used them because they gave it a face. I don't know which explanation is worse. My cousin Elena's story happened in summer 2018, when she was 20. She lived with her parents in Astoria and worked weekdays near Herald Square and weekend closing shifts at a burger place in Long Island City. Several men spent their evenings behind the complex fixing cars. Elena recognized most of them. They would nod, say hello, or joke that they had saved her a parking space. One man stood out because of his car, a silver sedan with blue headlights and a loud exhaust. His name, she later learned, was Victor. One Monday morning, Elena found his car parked beside hers. When she got into her Honda, she noticed Victor sitting behind the wheel, smiling. She pulled out. He followed. At first, she assumed they were going the same way. But he stayed behind her through every turn, followed her onto the Queensboro Bridge, and entered her work garage. He parked 1 space away. At the escalator, he introduced himself. "I'm Victor," he said, pronouncing it carefully. "And you?" "Elena." "How old?" She hesitated. 20. "I am 28. Is problem?" "I don't know you, so I don't think your age is the problem." He laughed as though she had made a joke. When they reached her store, he looked at the sign and said, "Now I know where you work. I see you tonight." Elena told herself he meant they would meet back at the apartment. Still, the sentence bothered her all day. At closing time, his sedan was waiting beside her car. Victor stepped out holding a red rose. She refused it twice, but he kept pressing it toward her until she accepted just to end the conversation. She left the flower in her trunk and threw it away at a gas station. For the rest of the week, he appeared after each shift. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he offered movie tickets or asked her to dinner. She rejected every invitation. When he refused to leave, she occasionally accepted the drink and dumped it later. On Saturday, Elena worked until 1 in the morning at the burger restaurant. Employees had a safety rule: 1 person drove around the building before everyone else walked to their cars. Elena volunteered because she had a bad feeling. Victor's sedan was parked beside hers. She drove around the building and told her coworkers to wait. Victor moved his car to the far side of the lot, allowing the others to leave. Elena should have driven away with them. Instead, she stopped beside him and lowered her window, intending to explain that he couldn't keep appearing at her jobs. Before she finished, Victor opened his door, crossed between the cars, and climbed into her passenger seat. He knew where she lived. He knew both places where she worked. He had seen her parents and younger brother. Elena was terrified that making him angry would put them in danger. So she stayed calm. Victor talked as if they were on a date. He said he had moved to New York from overseas several years earlier. He mentioned living in Brooklyn, then said there had been a year when he lived somewhere else. Where? Elena asked. In jail, he said. She gripped the steering wheel. He quickly explained that it involved immigration documents and a car accident, not violence. Whether that was true, she couldn't tell. After 20 minutes, he smiled, said good night, and left her car. The following weeks were worse. Elena frequently saw his headlights in her mirror after work. He followed her to friends' apartments and once waited outside a laundromat for nearly 2 hours. At the drive-thru, he asked a coworker what time she finished. He also began using another man, Marco, to watch her when he couldn't. Marco was older, married, and had children. A mutual acquaintance said he was almost 40. One night, Elena parked behind her building and opened her trunk. A car behind her flashed its headlights. Victor and Marco were inside. Something in her finally snapped. She slammed the trunk, marched to their car, and told them that if either followed her again, she would go directly to the police with the photographs and plate numbers she had saved. Victor said nothing. Marco smiled and whispered, "Good night, Elena." For several months, they left her alone. Then Victor traded the silver sedan for a black SUV, and the following began again. Elena documented everything this time. She saved dates, screenshots, license plates, and blocked call recordings. Victor never directly threatened her, but he always made sure she knew he was nearby. One afternoon, he approached her outside a pharmacy with a younger man who spoke fluent English. The man explained that Victor wanted one honest chance. Elena told him clearly that she was not interested and that any further contact would be reported. That was the last time Victor spoke to her. Months passed. Life started to feel normal again. Then Elena ran into a teenager she knew from a neighborhood basketball program. His name was Adrian, and he lived in the same complex as Victor. While they talked, Elena asked if he knew the man with the black SUV. Adrian frowned. The one with the scar near his ear. Yes. You mean my dad? Elena froze. Adrian was 16. He mentioned 3 younger siblings and said his father had been married to his mother for over 20 years. Victor had lied about his age, his family, and the rest. A few days later, Elena told a friend named Samira, whose family came from the same country as Victor. Samira asked for a photo. When Elena showed her, Samira went pale. According to people in their community, Victor had fled after stealing money from men with political connections. His arrest in New York had not been a simple paperwork issue. There had been an investigation involving forged identities and possible links to an extremist group, though Samira didn't know what had been proven. She also showed Elena a video from a family celebration. Victor stood between 2 women. One was Adrian's mother. The other was introduced as his second wife. Apparently, his first wife had become so tired of him chasing younger women that she had helped arrange the second marriage, hoping it would keep him away from strangers. It hadn't. Elena never learned exactly what Victor wanted. Maybe he only enjoyed frightening her. Maybe something worse would have happened if she had entered his car or agreed to meet him alone. She moved out of Astoria the following year. To this day, she checks whether a vehicle stays behind her through more than 2 turns. The final story began after my parents bought a house near Staten Island's Greenbelt. It was new construction on a wooded lot at the end of a private road. The developer called the area quiet and family-friendly. He didn't mention that several projects there had been abandoned after workers complained about accidents, missing tools, and noises from the trees. We moved in during August before my junior year. For a few months, everything was perfect. The house had huge windows, a stone fireplace, and a detached guest room above the garage. My father placed his favorite guitar on a stand in the living room. That guitar was the first sign. Late at night, one string would snap so violently that it sounded like someone had struck the instrument. We blamed temperature changes until it happened while all 6 strings were loose. Then the cabinet started opening. Every morning, we found drawers pulled out, closets open, and interior doors standing wide. My father installed cameras, but they only showed the image freezing for several seconds before each event. After that, we heard footsteps outside. Something moved beyond the porch lights, circling the house but never entering the yard. At first we assumed it was a deer. Then dead animals began appearing near the tree line. They weren't eaten. They were arranged. A rabbit was placed on the welcome mat. 2 crows were found side by side on the garage roof. One morning, a young deer lay beneath my bedroom window with its legs folded under its body. My father called animal control. They said predators didn't leave remains like that. Guests began noticing things inside the house. My aunt saw a woman cross the upstairs hallway. One of my father's former Marine friends woke because someone opened every drawer in his room. He assumed it was me playing a prank until he saw a thin figure walk through the closed guest room door. The figure everyone described was female, young, and dressed in white. I saw her first in the reflection of the kitchen window. She stood behind me with wet hair hanging over her face. When I turned, the room was empty. The worst night came during a thunderstorm in October. At 2:17 a.m., every door in the house slammed at once. My family woke to footsteps racing up and down the stairs. Bedroom handles shook. Cabinets opened and closed in the kitchen. The guitar strings screamed from the living room. My father grabbed a baseball bat and stepped into the hallway. All the doors stopped. Then someone knocked 3 times from inside the wall beside him. The sound traveled down the hallway, one section at a time, as if whatever made it was moving between the studs. It reached my bedroom and stopped behind my headboard. A girl's voice whispered my name. I couldn't move. The voice came again from inside the wall. Open it. My mother pulled me away while my father tore the headboard loose. Behind it, the drywall was cold and damp, though the room was dry. The knocking moved beneath the floor and stopped under the window. Outside, in a flash of lightning, we saw the girl at the edge of the trees. She was barefoot. Her white dress hung in strips, and her head tilted at an angle no living person could hold. Then the porch lights went out. The police arrived to find every door open and nobody outside. One officer found a stone foundation under 100 yards behind our property. A local historian told us a tuberculosis hospital had stood there in the early 1900s. It burned in 1917, killing several patients, including 17-year-old Evelyn Marsh. An archive photo showed her in a white gown with the same long hair. My parents wanted to sell, but we stayed through winter. The activity continued. The guitar played by itself. Dead birds appeared on the roof. Once, muddy footprints led from the back door to my bedroom and ended beside the bed. In February, my father opened the wall where the voice had spoken. Inside, wrapped in rotting cloth, was a silver hospital bracelet engraved E.M. We gave it to the Historical Society and had the house blessed. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then, on our final night before moving, I woke at 2:17. The girl stood beside my bed. This time she looked terrified, not angry. She raised one finger to her lips and pointed toward the hallway. Behind her, Something much taller was crawling across the ceiling. We left without packing the rest of our things. The house sold 6 months later to a couple from Brooklyn. I heard they lasted less than a year. Whenever people ask if the girl was haunting us, I say no. I think she was trying to warn us about whatever had followed her out of those woods.